today for the ACRL EBSS current topics discussion on copyright and open educational resources. Our presenter is Carla Meyers, who is Assistant Librarian and Coordinator of Scholarly Communications at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Her responsibilities include licensing and copyright for open educational resources on campus, answering questions about U.S. copyright law, and helping faculty and students promote their scholarship and research within their professional communities and to the public. She received a BA in psychology from the University of Akron and a master's degree in library and information science from Kent State University. Of course, her presentation today will focus on the principles of licensing and copyright as it applies to creating and hosting OERs in academic libraries. And with that, Carla, take it away.
Hi, can you all hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here to speak with you about this topic. And first off, my sincere apologies about the technical difficulties I had about 2 weeks ago. So glad not to have those again. But I appreciate everybody's flexibility in rescheduling and being here today. My name is Carla Meyers. I'm the Coordinator of Scholarly Communications for the Miami University Libraries. Miami University is located in Ohio, not Florida. And as was shared in my introduction, I do a lot of work with not only copyright law, but the creation and use of open educational resources. So that's the background I'll be speaking from today. And what I want to talk with you about is licensing considerations for open educational resources. So as these are being created within our campus communities, what do the creators and authors need to know about licensing and sharing their work out for reuse? We're also going to talk about understanding reuse rights when engaging with OER. So we have faculty who are finding OER, students who are finding OER, or patrons who are finding OER and wanting to use them as part of the educational process. How can we help them understand what their rights are when they have these resources? Questions are always welcome. I'm going to do my utmost best to keep my eye on the chat screen. I will do my utmost best to answer your questions. Something I do share, though, is that I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you legal advice. If you ask me a question, primarily a copyright question, and I say, you know, that's a question that I'm going to have you go ask your Office of General Counsel. In that situation, I'm not trying to ignore or blow off your question. It's a situation where I think you really need legal advice on something, and I can make sure you're getting legal advice from an attorney who's representing you at your institution. So I want to dive right in with licensing considerations as part of the pre-publication process with open educational resources. So as open educational resources are being created, they can include many different types of copyrightable works. And under U.S. copyright law, these are the 8 different primary categories of copyrightable works. There's lots of subcategories to these 8 primary categories. When we look at the creation of open educational resources, in my experience, where we're most frequently seeing OER creation is in literary works, so as journal articles, so as open textbooks, so as open monographs, and then pictorial, graphical, and sculptural works that are included to help complement this text. There are absolutely OER that include all of these other categories, but literary works, pictorial, graphic, and sculptural works is where I think I see most of the OER creation being done. So when we're talking about the authorship of the OER, sometimes this is very, very simple. Sometimes we have one author who is creating absolutely everything. They're writing the text, they're creating the graphic or pictorial works that go in it. They are the sole author of the whole entire work. However, very frequently with OER, we see joint authorship situations. So a work of joint authorship occurs when 2 or more authors decide to work together to create a work that's eligible for copyright protection. So maybe we have 2 faculty members who decide to work to create an OER. Maybe we have a faculty member who is going to work to create the OER, but then they're also going to work with somebody else, maybe it's an art student, to create the pictures and graphics that are going into that work. So we see 2 or more people working together to create this open educational resource. Sometimes we have what we call compilation copyright situations. So a compilation occurs when multiple copyrighted works come together to create a whole new work. And one of the best examples I can think of to represent this is an edited book or an issue of a journal. So with an edited book, we have chapters that are usually authored by different people coming together to create the whole book. That is a compilation copyright. There is copyright in the individual chapters. There is also copyright in the way the work is brought together as a whole. Or for an issue of a journal, we have multiple articles within that issue, and the editor of that journal decides how those are going to come together. So it looks like in the chat, people are saying that the audio is a little bit iffy. I'm going to try adjusting my microphone. Can you let me know if this helps a bit? So we could have the compilation situations. We could also have a work made for hire situation. That can occur when somebody is hired or authorized to create an open educational resource. So for example, it could be that an institution has a publishing program, and as part of that publishing program, they are going out and recruiting faculty to create open educational resources. And it may be in that situation, they are treating this as a work made for hire program. And that faculty member is being hired to create this resource. And in that situation, the copyright does not vest with the author, but it actually vests with the library or the university or the publishing program. So I'm seeing more problems with audio issues. So I'm just going to pause for a moment to see if I can make changes to my microphone.
Carla,
to make this a little bit better. Hey, Rachel.
I was just saying maybe your face might be too close to the mic because we're hearing a lot of breath.
Okay.
So maybe try that. And then Alois had a question about whether or not you might be using a USB, but I'm not sure.
I'll keep an eye on the chat. And then we also may have situations, whether the work is being created by a single author or a joint author, where that OER contains third-party works who's not created by either one of those people. So we might have an author or two who are working together to write the text of an open educational resource textbook, but then they're going and finding pictures and charts and graphs from other places on the internet to incorporate into the OER. So with open educational resources, just thinking alone about who is actually the author and can have the license to this open educational resource, that can be a complicated.
Hey Carla, can I just interrupt real quick? You're cutting in and out again. The voice is good. It's not as breathy, but it's like it's just cutting in and out. So I'm not sure if there's a connection issue. Are you using a USB by any chance?
I'm using headphones with a microphone that attaches via USB.
Maybe Alois can jump in here because she had a question.
So when we're talking about the creation of an OER, one of the first things we have to think about is who are the authors in this situation? Because the authors are going to be the people who then designate what license is attached to the open educational resource. So the big license, this is going to be the license that is attached to the open educational resource as the whole. So if you're thinking about an OER textbook, you open up that OER textbook online, and usually on the cover page or the title page, you see a license that say this work is licensed as a CC BY work, a CC BY NC work. So we're going to call this the big license. When it comes to the big license for the entire open educational resource, very frequently we're encouraged to think about the 5 R's of open access as were identified by David Wiley. So the right for people using that open educational resource to retain a copy, to make a copy, to have it for their own use. The right to reuse that copy of the work, however might work best for them. The right to revise it, to go in and change it, to update it, to delete parts out, to add new information in. The right to remix it, to combine parts of it with parts of other works in order to create a new work. And then the right to redistribute it, whether it's the original work or a new work they might create based off the original work, to be able to share that work with other people. So very frequently when we're thinking about open educational resources and that big license that is attached to it as a whole, we are thinking about these 5 R's of open access. And very frequently, we see these big licenses expressed as Creative Commons licenses. I would love to do a whole webinar just on Creative Commons licenses, but here I'm just going to do a very brief overview of what these are and how they help support the 5 R's of open access. So a CC BY license means that this work can be retained, reused, revised, remixed, and redistributed however the user wishes, as long as the person who originally creates it is given attribution for being the person who created it. That's what the BY stands for, to provide attribution to the original creator. CCSA, the SA stands for share alike. That means if you make significant revisions to the original work, that your new derivative work is licensed under the same or an equivalent license as the original work was created under. We can have a CCND license. ND stands for no derivatives. So a derivatives might be a sequel, a lab manual that goes with a textbook. So a derivative is a re-expression of the original work. What a CCND license means is that you can keep a copy of the original work, you can reuse it, you can revise it on your own for your own personal use or mix it. If you make any changes to the work, though, you cannot distribute that revised version. That what is redistributed is the original version unto itself. So with these licenses, very frequently, the original author doesn't want significant changes made to their work. CC BY NC, the NC stands for non-commercial. This means that your use has to be a non-commercial use, which in its most kind of generic definition means that you are not profiting from the reuse of the particular work. So for example, under a CC BY NC license, I could take an open educational resource and share it with students in a class. However, it would be much more questionable if I was selling copies of that on Amazon and making a profit off of it. I could sell copies on Amazon for the cost that it cost me to produce those. But when you're making when you're making a profit over and above that, then that non-commercial component starts to kick in. And then these can be combined in different ways. So a CC BY NC SA license, CC is the Creative Commons license, BY provide attribution to the original author, NC, your purpose has to be non-commercial, and share alike, that if you make significant changes to the original, that your new work is shared under that original license. And then we have CC BY, give that attribution, NC, that it's a non-commercial use, and ND, that you don't make any changes to it. So these can be mixed and matched in different ways, and these support the 5 R's of open access in different ways. Then there is a CC0 license, and I say CC0 license, technically it's not a license, but I trip over that sometimes. CC0 is a dedication to the public domain. It is a tool that allows rights holders to say, I am placing my work in the public domain, that anybody can reuse this work in any way that they wish, that they do not have to give me attribution. It can be for a non-commercial purpose, it can be for a commercial purpose. They are free to reuse this work however they wish, and that I will not pursue people for claims of copyright infringement. So when we talk about the big licenses that are attached to open educational resources, most frequently these are expressed as Creative Commons licenses, and most frequently open educational resources will have the CC BY license on that because that does fully support the 5 R's of open access. However, my warning is here, or my own personal word of caution, is that when we have an OER author or OER authors who are trying to decide what license they want to place on that open educational resource for others to reuse it under, the 5 R's are important considerations, but as a copyright librarian, I also feel that the rights holders' wishes are important too. So I have worked with people who are authoring open educational resources, and they've said, I'm really open to this idea of taking this textbook or this resource and putting it out there freely for people to use. But I have a little bit of a hesitation about people making changes to it without checking with me first. And so in that situation, I will say, well, then maybe you want to select a CC BY ND license to have that no derivatives attached to it, so that people can make changes to the work for their own personal use, but that they won't be resharing those changed versions out there without going back and getting your permission for it. I can say that more frequently in the past 2 years, I've been having more serious conversations with my fellow copyright librarians, with librarians in general, and with OER authors about the idea of using a CC BY NC license. So Creative Commons license, BY, give the attribution, but your purpose has to be non-commercial. And where I think these conversations are coming from is that we've been seeing vendors who are taking open educational resources, putting them together in databases, and then selling these databases back to universities and saying for a yearly subscription fee or for a fee per cost per student that we have all these open educational resources in this database and that your faculty and students can go in there and search. And I hear some concerns from authors saying, but I put this out there for people to freely access, and now there's a little bit of a paywall here for people to engage with. That wasn't my original intent, and how can we prevent vendors from charging people to go in and find my open educational resource in the database that they've created? So I think the best thing you can do when you are working with students or faculty or colleagues at your institution is to have a discussion up front before the creation of the OER even begins and say, what big license do we want to attach to this work? Let's take a look at the different Creative Commons licenses. Let's take a look at what each one means. And let's think about what some of your concerns or hesitations might be in people reusing it and figure out which is the best license for your particular project. In the end, even if somebody goes with the most restrictive Creative Commons license there is, it is still a Creative Commons license. It is still a license that allows people individually to freely access and reuse and engage with that work. So I think just using a CC license in general is a wonderful thing for open educational resources due to their international recognition, due to their flexibility. But I think the more and more I work with OER, that choosing something like a CC BY license is great to support all 5 Rs, but that if authors have hesitations about changes to versions or commercialization of their product, that it's important that we listen to those as well and think about what CC license might best support their interest. So other things we have to think about in choosing a big license is, are there some type of open requirements that might be tied to a funder? So maybe you've received grant funding from a particular organization to help fund the creation of an OER. As part of that grant award, are there requirements that say this particular work that's being created has to be licensed under a particular CC type work? So making sure you consult that paperwork or the person who is funding to see if there's any requirements there. And if the requirement is that you have to use a particular license, say a CC BY license or maybe even a CC 0 license, being upfront with the authors about that so they can make an informed decision if they want to pursue that project, knowing that they will have to attach that license to it. Something else to think about is more frequently we are seeing institutions of higher education that have institutional open access policies. So encouraging members of their campus community to share the works they create out under certain licenses. Very frequently, these open access policies say just making a version of it freely accessible satisfies the requirements of the policy. Some will say CC BY or we encourage CC licenses. But thinking about if members of the campus community are creating this open educational resource and you have an institutional open access policy, how that might fall underneath that. And then also, if you work at an institution or a library that has either a press or an open educational resource publishing service, that sometimes they will have very specific requirements. So the library, the institution will fund the creation of your open educational resource, but you have to use a CC BY license. So here at Miami University, we are working on funding the publication of open educational resources, and we give faculty a choice. We say that as long as you choose a CC license, we are happy with it. We don't force them to choose any particular one. We encourage them to choose CC BY NC, so CC BY Give Attribution Non-Commercial, but we're pleased with any CC license that they choose. And I'm going to take a look at a question real quick. How do faculty at an institution that views all work products as work for hire apply to a license, or does the situation prevent OER creation? Great question, Rachel, and the answer is it depends. So most academic institutions have intellectual property policies in place that talk about the creation of faculty scholarship, whether it's class PowerPoint presentations and lecture notes, things they might create as part of the tenure and promotion process, whether that's writing a book or publishing an article or giving a presentation at a conference. And that may apply to the creation of OER monographs or textbooks as well. So what I always encourage people to do is, first off, go find your institution's intellectual property policy and see what it says about the creation of faculty and or employee scholarship. It could be a little bit mixed. So first off, it could say the works that our employees create or that our faculty create, they hold the copyright in. It may say that the works faculty create, they hold the copyright in, but for staff members, the institution holds the copyright. Sometimes they will say, there's almost a shared situation that faculty retain the copyright in the scholarship that they have, that they create, but that the institution has a right to obtain a copy and reuse that in certain ways, like for accreditation, things like that. Most institutions will have that intellectual property policy. Very frequently, you can find it in your institution's policy library or on the website for Office of General Counsel for your institution. So go take a look at that and see what it says about the ownership of faculty scholarship. So if you have faculty who are publishing OER, you might find your answer there in regards to who actually owns the copyright in the OER. If you are a OER librarian, it could be that maybe you're creating something within the scope of your job and it does become a work made for hire situation. And it could be then that the library, the institution actually holds the copyright in it. In that case, I would encourage librarians to have a talk with their library administrator about how does a potential work for made for hire situation apply to me and my job responsibilities as an OER librarian. And it could be that I know there are institutions out there where they say, we own the copyright in everything all of our employees create, that this is a true work made for hire situation. And it could be then that it is somebody at the institution who is deciding what license is going to be placed on that OER. So I don't know if these situations prevent the creation of open educational resources, but I think it could complicate it a little bit. And number one, understanding as people are creating these, how are they viewed as the owner by the institution? Or if it is a true work made for hire situation, who is the person at the institution who gets to decide what license is placed on that? Rachel, I hope that helped answer your question. If not, please type back and I'll be happy to elaborate on that more. So these are some things for you to consider when choosing a big license to attach to an OER. But there's also something we have to consider with the creation of the OER, and I call that the little licenses. So that could be that I'm writing a biology book, and I go out and I find Creative Commons images of different animals. So of a cheetah, of a giraffe, that I'm going to include in my biology textbook as I'm talking about these different animals. Those are not works that I've created. They're works that somebody else has been created, but they were licensed under Creative Commons licenses. So as long as I act within the scope of the license, I can include it in my open educational resource. But as part of that, I have to include a license somehow attached to that work saying that this was a Creative Commons photograph of a cheetah. It's licensed, let's say, under a CC BY 4.0 license, and that here's the person who created it and here's the name of the photograph. So the attribution requirements for reusing a Creative Commons work. Or maybe I went out and got permission from somebody to reuse a work that they created in my open educational resource. They didn't originally license it under a Creative Commons license, but I found it somewhere. I thought it was really interesting. I reached out to them and got their permission to reuse it. So making sure that I provide attribution to that person and saying reused with permission or something like that tied to the photograph. So thinking about where within this book there's third-party created content, how we have to provide that attribution or express the license that was attached to that particular work. Something to think about here is when third-party works are being reused. It is best to get permission from people in writing in a non-exclusive license situation, which is somebody is merely giving me permission to reuse their work in a certain way. They're not transferring their copyright over to me. The law does not require that we get that in writing. As a copyright librarian, I get it in writing anyway. That way, if there is ever a question about the use, I can go back to that email or I can go back to that letter and say, Here is what we actually discussed when you were giving the permission. Something else I do is if we are reusing Creative Commons works in OERs that we are creating here at Miami University, I go do screen captures of the pages where we got that from. I download as much information as I can to document the Creative Commons license as it existed when we found and engaged with and reproduced that Creative Commons work within the scope of that open educational resource. I know some of my fellow copyright librarians think I go a little bit overboard with that, but my idea in documenting all of that permission or documenting those Creative Commons licenses is that if a question ever comes from the rights holder, I want to be able to quickly and easily pull information about the circumstances under which we reuse that particular work to be able to walk through that conversation with the rights holder. And then, of course, making sure that these little licenses for the third-party works are attached to each particular work as they appear in the OER, whether maybe that's appearing directly under the chart or the graph, maybe you have an attributions page at the end of each chapter, or maybe you have an attribution section at the end of each book, but making sure that is attached to each particular work. So we have another question. What's your definition of a license for faculty members who are confused and maybe don't understand copyright at all? Great question, Charlotte. So copyright is one of those things that I think a lot of faculty are cognizant of, but as far as the nuances within ownership or licensing or giving permission, that they are seeking more information on. So I think in these situations, it's a great time to sit down with faculty members. So when I have these consultations, when we're getting ready to work with a new author to publish an open educational resource, they have to physically meet with me. It's usually about an hour-long meeting. We talk about the publication service that we have, all the different nuances of it. And one of the things we talk about is copyright. So do you understand, as the person who is authoring this book, that you are going to be the copyright holder? What we are asking from you as part of our publishing service is a Creative Commons license to publish it under. So you're not transferring your copyright over to us. You retain the copyright holder. Instead, in recognition of us providing you with the publishing support, you are going to attach this Creative Commons license that allows us to reuse it. Another point of faculty confusion I run into sometime with the creation of OER that we talk about in these consultations is I will say, are you creating all your content from the ground up from this project, or are you reusing anything you've published before? And very frequently, faculty members will say, well, actually, now that you mention it, there's this book chapter that I published a few years ago, and I was thinking about just including it in this OER, or I recently wrote an article on this topic, and I was going to take that article and put it within the OER. So then we have to talk about, as part of that publication process, did you maybe sign your copyright over to that book publisher or to that journal publisher that may limit the way that we are able to reuse that previous work in your open educational resource? So in this situation, I think it's talking them through the nuances of ownership, of sharing their work out and what we mean by a license, maybe where they're reusing works that they've self-authored that they think, but I created this, there's no problems with me reusing it, but there might be a copyright transfer or some other situation going on that could inhibit that reuse. And I think communicating just as much information as we can to help them understand the basics of copyright. So with copyright librarians, we have background and expertise in doing this. There's so many more opportunities these days to go to conferences and engage in sessions or even webinars like this where we can all learn more about copyright. So I think it's drawing on the knowledge we have, whether that's as a copyright librarian or any other librarian who might be engaging with faculty on this topic, but then also identifying what are great quality resources out there that talk about copyright that I can learn more about. Most copyright librarians will tell you we never stop learning, we're constantly studying the law, or that we can share with faculty that can help them better understand their rights under US copyright law. And when we get to the end of my presentation, I'm going to have some of those reputable resources listed that either you can consult to learn more or that you can share with your faculty members to help them make a more informed decision about what we mean when we're talking about licenses or their rights as rights holders. I hope that helps, Charlotte. Chat back and let me know if I can provide any additional information on that. So when we're choosing a little license, again, I want to emphasize that the 5 R's are important, but that the rights holders' wishes are important too. So I recently was talking with a librarian at another institution, and they had actually hired students to help support OER creation on their campus. So they hired a student who has a graphic design background. And this student employee who's hired by the library goes out and works with faculty members who are creating OER textbooks to help make sure that the graphics and images that they have in their book are the best quality that they can be. I thought that that was absolutely brilliant. It's a skill set that these students have. It gets them some work area because their major was graphic design. It lets them work with these faculty clients so they can talk about that in a job interview. And we know how important quality graphics are. So in that situation, it could be that the library is actually the copyright holder because that could be a work made for hire situation. But does the library want to make sure that the student employee is recognized for their work? So maybe we are providing attribution to the student employee who created it. Maybe we're saying copyright by the library, created by, and then the student's name. Again, in these situations, using Creative Commons licenses are convenient, but you can absolutely say all rights reserved or reused with permission. Those works can absolutely be included in an open educational resource if the library is the copyright holder, or in those situations where we do get permission from somebody to reuse their work, saying reused with permission and then listing that person's name so that somebody else who may want to reuse that work knows who to contact if they want to go get permission to reuse that in a particular way. And then of course too, thinking again about are those funder or institutional or publishing requirements out there, or like I had mentioned earlier, if it was published somewhere else first, sometimes faculty will struggle a little bit with the idea, I created this, maybe I send the copyright over to the publisher, but I can still reuse this in something in the future. Well, that depends. We have to go back and take a look at that publication agreement that you signed. So when you're choosing those little licenses, whether it's a chapter going into an OER or an image or a graph or a photograph, thinking about how we attach those little licenses to the work, or it's one thing if we find a CC image online. It's another thing if we are creating the charter graph or image and want to attach a license to it, what license are we going to choose? Is it going to be a CC license, or are we going to do something like all rights reserved? Where do we place these little licenses? I think it's best if we place them directly under the chart or the graph or the image. It's right there. If the OER gets pulled apart or remixed, hopefully that license is very easily translated over. Sometimes I've seen OER where they have an image credit at the end of the chapter. So as you go through the chapter, each image is labeled image 1, image 2, image 3. And then on the last page of chapter, maybe where they have references, they also have all the credits for the images. That's not necessarily a wrong way to do it, but if that work gets remixed somehow and that page doesn't get transferred over with the new remixed work, then those licenses may be lost. I've also seen OER where they have images labeled throughout the whole entire book, and then at the end of the book, they have a section that provides attribution for all the images and charts and graphs. Again, that's not necessarily a wrong way of doing it, but if that work gets remixed or pulled apart, the connection to that citation information can get lost, which is why I personally like it best if the attribution or the credit or the permission information is attached to each small work that's included in the chapter. So to each chart, to each graph, to each photograph. But again, this is up to each institution or author as they are creating the work. Something interesting that I found once that I think is another way of doing this is NASA's media usage guidelines. If you go to Google and you type in NASA copyright, you're going to get this image. You'll find this information. And what NASA says is, as you are going through our website, you're going to see all types of copyrightable content, reports, images, graphs, things like that. If there is no attribution on those works, that means that NASA created it. And NASA being a government organization, those works are in the public domain and you're free to reuse those. However, if you come across a photograph on our website and that has somebody's name on it, so copyright 2019 Carla Meyers, that means that we went and got permission from Carla Meyers to use that photograph, that she is the copyright holder of that photograph. And if you want to reuse that photograph, you might have to reach out to her in order to get permission to do so. And I think this is something we can absolutely consider for open educational resources too. You could have something at the beginning of the book saying that this work is licensed as a CC BY work. And that throughout the book, you might see individual images, charts, graphs, things like that, that have attribution to a specific individual. In those situations, we have reused those works under a Creative Commons license that was attached by the rights holder, or we got their permission to incorporate into this work. Otherwise, things that are not directly identified or labeled, those are licensed under the CC BY license that we have attached to this work. So I think this is one way of kind of simplifying things, but again, it's going to be up to each institution to decide how do we want to identify these little license works, and then how do we want to place the licenses on them. So the placement of the big license, you have your author who has authored their open educational resource. They have used charts, graphs, figures, things like that from other people. You have gone through with them and made sure that in each individual place that they have recognized where they are third-party works, that they're reusing them, that they're communicating where they got that from and any appropriate license. And now you want to attach the license, the big license, to the OER work itself. Where are you going to post that? So I've seen a variety of situations here as well. Sometimes I've seen the Creative Commons license that is attached to the OER as a whole simply posted to the web page where people can go to download the open educational resource. That's not necessarily a wrong or bad thing, but once you download the open educational resource, that Creative Commons license is not repeated within the open educational resource itself. So if I'm a person who went to the website and downloaded the open educational resource, and from that website I saw that was a CC BY work, then hopefully I know and remember that this was a CC BY work, and so if I'm teaching a class, I'm free to share that with my students. However, if I then as a teacher, say an astronomy course, download that OER from that web page and upload it to Canvas or Blackboard for my students to use, that Creative Commons license, if it's not included on the OER itself, my students might not know that that's a CC BY work and the reuse rights that they have underneath it. So I think it's great to communicate the CC license or whatever license the work is licensed under on the webpage where people go to download the open educational resource. But I don't think that's the only place it should be communicated. With some open educational resources, it's printed on the title page or the cover. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But what I want people to think about is that if that work is remixed and for some reason the person who's remixing it removes that title page or that cover page, then that license might not be repeated elsewhere in the book. And again, people who engage with that might not understand their reuse rights. I've seen some OER that put that Creative Commons license on every single page. So in some corner of the page, you see that little CC logo for the license. So the CC BY, that gray and black logo, or whatever license you're using. In some ways, I wonder if that's a little bit of overkill to have it on every page. Now, the benefit of that is if that work is remixed, that they're not going to miss that CC license unless the person remixing it goes through and deletes that off every single page. But that is some extra content to include on every single page. And there's some accessibility considerations if people are using a screen reader to have that identified on every single page as well. What I usually encourage people to do when I'm working with them on the creation of OER, especially OER textbooks, is to put that Creative Commons license at the beginning of every chapter. We will put it at the top of the page, the bottom of the page, maybe at the end of the chapter. But that way, if that work gets remixed, at least it's on every single chapter, and hopefully that will be translated along. But again, it's that institution figuring out, the one who's creating the open educational resource, or the faculty member who's creating the open educational resource, deciding when we're communicating this big license, what is this OER license as? How best can we put that information out there, and doing so in a way that makes sure that people don't get it confused with the little licenses, those individual licenses that might be attached to a photograph of a cheetah that's included in the open educational resource that I used. So we talked about having on a web page or a page by page the copyright notice. Licenses you will meet. So here it's talking about what does this license actually mean. So I've attached a Creative Commons license, a CC BY work, to my OER in general. And then throughout this open educational resource, attached to individual photographs or charts or graphs, you might see a CC BY license. You might see reused by with permission. You might see reused under fair use. So something I also encourage my faculty members to do here at Miami University is we have our title page. We have our cover page, which has the title and the author on it. We have a license on it that says this work is licensed under a CC BY or a CC BY NC work, whatever we choose. And then the next page, we will have something that says licenses you will see in this book includes. So this is a screenshot from a great illustrated classics book, Little Women. I grew up reading these books. I love them so much. And the beginning of every book, they have characters you will meet in this book. So as you are reading this book, what are things that you're going to encounter? What are people and characters and places that you're going to encounter that you should be aware of? And this was actually my inspiration for this licensing page. So what we say is, as you are working through this Creative Commons book, licenses you might see include the CC BY license that this work is licensed under. This means that you can reuse this work in multiple different ways. As a whole, and the reuse rights that grants you. Some screenshots or some images might have all rights reserved. That means that all of the copyright with this particular work vests with the original rights holder, and that you may have to get their permission for reuse. That you might see reused under fair use. What this means is that we made a fair use determination to include this work in this open educational resource, and that you may need to make your own fair use determination if you are going to reuse this image in something else that you might be creating. So it's to me, a way to help people understand these different licenses that they are seeing in the book, what those might mean, and what their reuse rights for those are. I see we have a few questions that come in. I'm going to take a look at this real quick. Is this screenshot really copyrightable? It's not really creative. Charlotte, can you tell me more specifically what screenshot you're referring to? I just want to make sure I answer your question correctly. And now we have a question from Hunter College. In what context would you say something is reproduced under fair use? You're exactly right. So fair use, saying reused under fair use, it's not a statement of permission. So when we say this work is reused under fair use, we're communicating a few things. First off, that when we made the conscious decision to include that work in this particular, in our OER, that we did so under the fair use exception found in section 107 of US copyright law. So making it clear to the readers of our OER that this is not a CC work, a Creative Commons licensed work, that it is not something that we went and got permission for, that we are reusing it under fair use. And that ties back to our license information page that we are including in our open educational resources. So what we say there is that, I'm trying to think of a short way to say this, that fair use is an exception that can allow the reuse of third-party works in certain situations, including for criticism, comment, and educational purposes, and that a fair use determination has been made to include some third-party works, and these have been identified within our open educational resource, and that if you wish to reuse this work in some capacity, you will have to make your own fair use determination about your particular use. And we're going to get to that in a second when we're talking about helping people understand their reuse options with OER. So the photo in the current slide, yes, Charlotte, I would agree with you. So when we talk about copyrightable works, in order to have copyright protection, something has to be original and creative. Factual works aren't technically eligible for copyright protection. And this photograph is basically facts. So who are the characters you will meet in Little Women? They are the March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, Amy, and Marmee, their mother. So there's a lot of factual information here. Maybe, perhaps, there might be scant copyright protection in this image for the way this was arranged on screen. Not likely. My inclusion of the photo credit here is just to recognize that this did come from a copyrightable work and to provide that attribution or provide credit to let people know where I got that image from. So here's where I was talking about the OER licensing. So as an OER licensing summary, what I hope you take away from licensing OER. So you are creating OER, you are working with faculty and students on your campus to create open educational resources, is upfront before the project even gets started, decide what big license this OER as a whole is going to be licensed under. Talk about that with the people who are being involved in the creation, make sure everybody is comfortable with that. And especially if you are mandating that a particular CC license be used, like CC BY or like CC0, that everybody who is involved with that project is comfortable with that. as you are creating the OER, whether it's chapters that are being reused or photographs, arts, or charts or images, as you are identifying each one of those third-party works, be exceedingly proactive in tracking where did you get it from? Are you reusing it under a Creative Commons license that the rights holder attached to it? Did you get permission for the work? Are you using it under fair use? Documenting that proactively, because it's very hard sometimes to go back and find that later. And then making sure you are appropriately tagging those licenses, whether it's attached to each individual third-party work, whether it's something at the end of the chapter or at the end of the book. And then understanding how you are clearly communicating all of these licenses, the big licenses and the little licenses, to the people who are using that work. So we've created our open educational resource. We've put it out there for people to use. People are finding open educational resources. They are engaging with them. How do we help our faculty, our students, our patrons understand what their rights are when they are engaging with open educational resources that are licensed for reuse? So we have these challenges with open educational resources. Of course, it's just getting people to accept them as quality resources. There are challenges sometimes in finding open educational resources, finding one in a particular subject area, or there's so many different open educational resource libraries out there, searching different ones to find one in a particular subject area. And then, of course, there's a challenge of making sure that they are constantly updated, so they stay current with new information as it's discovered. Copyright, licensing, and reuse issues are tricky too. So as a copyright and OER librarian, some of the challenges that I have seen when faculty and students are looking to use open educational resources is they equate the open part of open educational resources to mean this work has no copyright protection at all. I can do whatever I want with this and it's no big deal because it's open, it's out there for people to use. It could be understanding the difference between the big license and the little licenses, and then understanding their options when works have been reused under fair use within open educational resources. And I told you we were going to get back to that. So let's take a look at these one by one. So understanding what their reuse rights are. So I will have faculty members say, oh, this is an open educational resource. I can do whatever I want. And I say to them, kind of. Let's take a look at the Creative Commons license that was attached to this open educational resource and talk about what reuse rights you have underneath it. So the vast majority of open educational resources we run into are CC by works. And I will let the faculty member or the students know this means you have 5R access, that you can share this with other people, that you can edit, that you can remix it, that you can take your remix version and share that with other people, as long as you provide that attribution, which is that key part of complying with that Creative Commons licenses. So CC BY licenses, I think, tend to be pretty clear. Where sometimes I see faculty and students get tripped up is something like a Creative Commons by share alike license. So the share alike licenses mean that if you make significant changes to the original work, your new work has to be shared under a Creative Commons by share alike license or some type of equivalent to what the original rights holder put on their work. So the faculty member will say, oh, but if I remix this with something else, does that mean I have to translate over that CC BY SA license to the new OER that I'm creating? Well, that depends. Generally, if you're just taking a chapter or two out of that work, that CC BY SA license, you will want to keep that on the few chapters you pull out of that original OER. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your remixed OER has to be under that same license, because you're not necessarily making significant changes to the original work. If you're going in and editing the original work up and putting in new paragraphs or photographs or things like that, yes, then I would probably say that your new OER has changed significantly enough from the original that you have to have that CC license on the whole entire work. So in helping faculty and students understand what do these CC licenses mean, some of them are clear, some of them are not, but helping them understand for the big license, what does that mean in terms of reuse? And then too, when you're encountering little licensed work, so you found a photograph of a cheetah in that OER, and you want to pull that photograph of the cheetah out and put it into your PowerPoint slide, what does that mean for you? And then there's licenses. So sometimes we go out and get permission to reuse a particular work in an open educational resource. I wanted a picture of a penguin. I couldn't find one that I liked online. I ended up finding one from the Cincinnati Zoo, but it wasn't licensed as a Creative Commons work. So I went and got permission from the Cincinnati Zoo to include that photograph of the penguin in my open educational resource. In that situation, I might say reused with permission of the Cincinnati Zoo. So helping faculty and students understand, so when you see that, what does that mean? Does that mean you still have fair use rights to go in and reuse that particular image? Does that mean you need to go get permission as well? So having those discussions with users about what does that mean? And then there's reused under fair use. So more frequently, we're starting to see OER that incorporate third-party works that they have used under fair use. And sometimes what I've heard faculty or students say is, oh, but they say here they reused it under fair use. So that means how I reuse it is fair use because they said it was a fair use. And what I explain to them in that situation is their fair use does not mean your use is a fair use that falls under their fair use. That was kind of confusing. That what it means is they thought through the 4 factors of fair use for incorporating this image into the OER. And if you want to reuse this image, say you want to take this image of a cheetah out and put it in your PowerPoint presentation, you need to think if you're doing so would also fall under fair use as well. So making your own 4-factor analysis for incorporating that image into something else. These are the 3 big points of confusion that I often see, and I hope that was kind of clear in how I shared that. How do we answer copyright questions related to the creation and use of OER? I think here you need to first decide what services are you going to be offering. So when faculty and students come to you with questions about, I'm writing an OER and I have copyright questions about reusing things, are you going to do a full service consultation? Are you going to sit down and go through that OER they're creating with them, image by graph, work by work, and talk about here's what we can use under Creative Commons licenses. Here's what you can go get permission for. We can help you with those permission services. Here's where you might be able to go obtain a license, or you may be able to reuse this under fair use. Are you just going to consult on really tricky issues? So this may or may not be a fair use reusing that. Somebody in the library will make that final determination on fair use? Or are you simply going to provide information? So they come to the library, they say that I'm authoring an OER, I have some copyright questions, can you help me? And you say, I can help you with providing information on US copyright law, your rights as a creator and authoring that OER, and exceptions like fair use, so then you can go make your own fair use determination about reusing works within the scope of your OER. And then too, when people want to use an OER, how are you going to answer these copyright questions? Are you just merely going to share information on copyright and licenses that they might have? Are you going to field reference type questions, so in-depth questions about where did they get this from and I want to reuse it, can you help me? Or are you going to provide full service consultations, take them through any scenario that might be tied to copyright and licensing, and in some situations maybe be giving them more than information about their reuse rights under Creative Commons licenses or under exceptions like fair use. So when I get copyright questions, when a faculty member comes to me and says, hey Carla, I'm working with you on writing this OER, I want to reincorporate works into this OER that I didn't create, what are my options? They can use public domain works. So maybe you are writing a OER on astronomy. Let's go to NASA and see what photographs and charts and things like that that you can find there, that NASA being a US government agency, that those works are in the public domain, that they don't have copyright protection. So we don't have to worry about infringement considerations. Or let's go see and look where we can find online that resources you might want to use have been licensed under Creative Commons licenses. We can think about fair use for the incorporation of things into that. If it doesn't fall into one of those 3 categories, can we go get permission or can we go pay a license fee to include that work you want to use in that open educational resource? And there's a really great framework that's put together by Kevin Smith and Lisa Macklin that will kind of take you through these steps. You'll have a link in the PowerPoint slides to that. So when you're talking to people about creation of open educational resources, questions that I ask them is, Did you create this item? Did a student create it for you? Did one of your colleagues or a fellow faculty member create this for you? Where did you get this from? This license that you have attached to this work, where did you find this as a Creative Commons work? Can we go look at that website again to make sure everything's in order there? What fair use tools and resources are available to either aid you or aid them in making fair use determinations? Where might we have to go get permission, and how do we proactively get this permission ball rolling? Because any copyright librarian will tell you, sometimes you get permission, sometimes you hear back from the rights holder in 24 hours, sometimes you don't hear back from them by months. So it's a process you want to work on proactively. Or we may need a license here. Here for this particular work, we may have to pay to reuse it in this OER. And where are we going to get this money from, and how are we going to obtain this license? When people are looking to reuse OERs, what do you know about the license that's attached to the work? Is it a Creative Commons license? Does it say reused with permission? Can you reach out to the people who authored the OER to get more information? So if you find an OER that's authored as a CC by ND, no derivatives work, and you have a faculty member who wants to make derivatives, how can we reach out to the person who authored that OER to get their permission for that faculty member to create and share their derivative work? And then if they're encountering things like used with permission or used under fair use, those little licenses attached to individual works, how can we communicate to our users, our student and faculty and patrons, what things they can then consider, like their own fair use, or like going and getting permission to reuse that particular work? Copyright questions are sometimes easy and you can answer them very, very quickly. Never, ever hesitate to say to somebody, I don't know the answer to that now, but I'm going to go find the answer and get back to you. Think about what the scenario is, go look at what options might be available to them to reuse that work under US copyright law, and then communicate that information back to them. Common misconceptions that often pose challenges. I found this OER on the internet. If it's on the internet, there's no copyright. They put it out there for anybody to use. I can do whatever I want. Sometimes even maybe we have an OER that's CC by NC and D, so one of the more restrictive licenses, and the faculty member will say to me, but this is an educational use. That license doesn't matter. I can still do whatever I want. No, not necessarily. We can still consider fair use above and beyond Creative Commons licenses, but we have to think more carefully about that. Otherwise, we want to act within the scope of the license. Or one of my favorite ones, I provided citation to the work. I gave them credit, so there's no copyright infringement. Providing credit to somebody who originally created a work is a great and fabulous thing to do, but that does not negate claims of copyright infringement. So answering questions, whether it's a faculty member coming to you saying, I'm creating an OER, I'm a little confused about copyright, I'm not understanding these Creative Commons licenses exactly. Can you help me? Yes, you can. It's always a little bit scary when you get started with copyright questions, but providing bad information to people can be scarier. Learn as much as you can about US copyright law. Learn as much as you can about Creative Commons licenses. If you're uncertain of your answer, go consult quality resources. Come back, share that information with the person you're engaging with. Let them know what options might be available to you. Every now and then a faculty member might say, well, I think this is fair use to reuse this work, and you seem to be hesitating. I don't care what you say. I'm just going to use that as a fair use anyway. Sometimes they don't exactly like your answer. Try not to take it too personally, but try to reiterate them why you are sharing the pertinent information that you are sharing with them. So some quick presentation takeaways, and then I can stay beyond 3 o'clock to answer questions because I realize we're right up against the end of this webinar. Copyright in OER creation and copyright in OER use are heavily, heavily intertwined. When people are creating open educational resources, whether it's you as a librarian, whether it's the library staff, whether it's faculty, whether you're help leading the charge as a librarian to inspire students and faculty create OER on their campus, everybody should be cognizant of these issues. And the great thing is a little bit of knowledge about copyright law can take you a long, long way. When you're uncertain what the answer is, go find that quality information and don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. On my slide, I included my email address. If you can't tell, I love talking about these issues. Reach out to me. I say this with no hesitation, with all seriousness. If you have questions about this, send me an email, contact me. I will do my utmost best to help walk you through these issues. Just because I'm so passionate about copyright and OER creation, if I can help support other people in doing that, I am happy to do so. You'll see toward the end of these slides, and I will make sure, and Lois and everybody has these slides that they can send out to the group, that I have more tools and resources about copyright. Again, I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties with my microphone. I realize it's 3 o'clock. You can email with me with questions afterwards if you have to leave now. Otherwise, I can stay on this line to help answer questions that everybody in the audience might have.
Thank you so much, Carla. I understand if people have to go, but if you do have a question, go ahead. We'll stay here for a few more minutes, and sounds like Carla's welcoming any questions you have.
Yes, and I'm pulling my email back up right now. Hopefully you can see that there. So that you have that, and like I said, I will be sharing my PowerPoint slides with Lois and Rachel and everybody so they can make sure that those are in your hands as well. So I did see one question. If a faculty member pulls an image from Google Images, it's copyrighted, and is using it on a poster to market a course around campus to students, is that a fair use? Nicole, this is one of those legal questions. So what the faculty member would want to think about in this particular situation is the 4 factors of fair use. So they went out, they found this copyrighted image on Google, they are not the rights holder. They can consider fair use for reusing this image, but what they want to think about is their purpose. What is their purpose in reusing the image? What is the nature of the image? Is it a highly creative cartoon that's meant to draw people in, make them laugh, think this might be a fun course? Is it a picture of a cheetah that's being used to advertise a biology course? How much of the work they are reusing? If you think about fair use, photographs are one time where very frequently we have to use the whole entire work. It's very hard to give people half a photograph and still convey a meaning. And then of course the 4th factor, what is the potential effect on the market? Is this an image that's out there that's maybe something like a Getty image or some other type of professional image that people sell licenses for its reuse? Or is this something that just somebody shared out there in general? So if a faculty member would come to me with this question, I would tell them, you can absolutely think about fair use for including this image on your poster. And here's some tools and resources like the American Library Association's Fair Use Evaluator that can help you make a thoughtful fair use determination. Although alternately, are you aware of the Creative Commons? So you want to use an image of a cheetah on your poster. There's tons and tons of copyrighted photographs of cheetahs out there on the internet, but there's also tons and tons of photographs of cheetahs that are licensed as Creative Commons works. And if we can go find one that's licensed as a CC BY work, then you can reuse this on your poster as long as you provide that attribution, and you don't have to worry about claims of infringement because you're working within the scope of that license. So kind of going back to that copyright workflow, the image they want to use, is it copyrighted? If yes, is it in some way licensed for reuse, like it's a Creative Commons work? If not, then they consider fair use for including that on the poster. If the faculty member thinks it's not a fair use, could then they go get permission to use it on the poster? Licensing is a final option here. I think I'd be hard pressed to imagine a faculty member paying a license fee to include an image on a poster to advertise a course, but that option is absolutely there if they get all the way through those other 4 options and decide it doesn't fall into any of those. I hope that answers your question, Nicole. Chat back if it doesn't. So another question, what about considering the piece used versus the body of the work? Say one comic strip versus the author's whole career. Another great question, Connie. So in both situations, I think you need to consider fair use either individually or as a whole. So if you're just using individual comic strips here and there or cells out of a comic strip, that is going to be one fair use determination. So say I have a book, Mutts. It's a cartoon about a little cat and a dog. It's one of my favorites. The creator of Mutts, the artist Patrick McDowell. I have almost all of his books. I just love this comic strip so much. So I think it would be one consideration if I wanted to pull one comic out of this and include it in a PowerPoint presentation that I'm licensing as an OER, or including it in a chapter of an OER that I'm writing. Now, thinking about why am I reusing that? So it's clearly a copyrighted work. It's not in the public domain. I've never seen any of his works licensed under Creative Commons works. It could be that he has, but most of the ones I see are all rights reserved. I can consider fair use for the incorporation of that comic strip, let's say right now, one comic strip in my open educational resource PowerPoint or textbook. But they're thinking about my purpose. Am I just including it for entertainment to get a laugh out of people? Or am I talking about the history of comics in the United States? Am I talking about graphic design and art? And let's take a look at the different ways that artists draw cats, draw dogs, things like that. So what is my purpose in using it? What is the nature of the work? It's a highly, highly creative work. How much am I using? If I want to compare Mutts to Garfield, maybe I need to compare 10 different comic strips from each one. But if I'm just talking about art and graphic design, it could be that I just need to use like one cell from one comic strip to talk about how he represents cats in that. And then the potential effect on the market. If I'm just using one cell or a few comic strips, how might that be different than if I'm reproducing, say, 20 or 50 of his comic strips within the context of my open educational resource? So I would say that these are some of the things that somebody will want to think about as part of their fair use determination in the scenario that you presented. But then, of course, if you're kind of hesitant about fair use, you can always reach out to the artist and see if you can obtain a permission or a license to reuse those works. I hope that helped, Corey. Are there any other questions, or am I missing any other questions? A lot of stuff kind of came at the end, and I'm scrolling back through them. But if I've missed your question, please repost it. I want to answer it if I can. And somebody asked, are your slides provided under CC by SA and C? I think I put them under by CC. I think I put them under CC by NC. Let me go back to that slide and check. Yep, CC by NC. So you are welcome to share my slides as long as you provide attribution and it is a non-commercial purpose. And Aubrey asked, will I be able to share a recording of this presentation with my faculty? Aubrey, I think that's actually a question for Elois and Rachel to answer. I'm not certain how the recording will be made available, if it's going to be shared publicly online, in which situation you could share a link to it, or if it's just going to be distributed to the people in the webinar and what license they might be attaching to the recording, which has a separate copyright from my presentation.
I think that's actually a question for Elois.
This is Elois. Yes, you can share this recording because it will be made available publicly on YouTube when it's uploaded.
So a question from Amanda, how do you handle being seen as an expert? Is there a fear you'll be seen practicing law by giving legal advice? Absolutely, Amanda. I was terrified with this when I first started acting as a copyright librarian. The more I've been working with copyright, I think the more comfortable that I get with it. So kind of like with this presentation, I usually predicate conversations with, I'm not an attorney. And there are even some copyright librarians out there who are attorneys, but they will say, I may have a law degree, but that doesn't mean I'm your individual attorney or the information that I'm sharing with you is legal advice being given by the institution. So I start my conversations by saying, you know what, I love copyright law. I've been working with it for 10 years. I have experience and knowledge that I'm so eager to share with you, but I'm not an attorney. I will do my utmost best to answer your questions. But if I come across a situation or question you're asking where it looks like you're going to need legal advice, then I'm going to loop Miami University's Office of General Counsel into our conversation because they can give you legal advice on behalf of the institution. And I have a really great working relationship with our Office of General Counsel here that I can do that. I always make it very clear that I'm providing them with information about the law. And I think in regards to being an expert or being seen as an expert, I've been working with copyright law for a long time, over 10 years. And during that time, I've been able to develop a wealth of knowledge on a topic. But I think every copyright librarian will tell you that there are always new things to learn. And that the second I don't know the answer to a question, I tell them, I don't know that answer for you, but I am beyond happy to go find it for you. I think giving bad information in general is so dangerous, but especially when you are dealing with a legal situation. If you're giving bad information to somebody, well, that could mean a lawsuit down the road. So I never hesitate to say, I don't know the answer to that one, and I'm going to go find it for you. And I think, too, in the end, providing people options. And that's kind of the workflow that I talked about. Well, your work's not in the public domain. It's clearly protected by copyright. You can consider fair use, given the circumstances of the situation that you shared with me. I personally would hesitate to make a fair use argument there, but we can go get permission, or we can see about getting a license. So giving them options. Sometimes they are not always pleased with the options that you give them. I have had situations where people have said to me, fine, if you're not going to let me do this, I'm going to go do this on my own, and what are you going to do about it? And I've said in those situations, I'm not the copyright police. I'm more than happy to help you explore these options further so that we can make sure your use is falling within the scope of the law. And usually in those situations, I send them a follow-up email. Thanks again for chatting me today. Just to recap what we talked about, here's a scenario described, here's what you want to do, and here are the reuse options that I think are available to you. That I am more than happy to discuss these reuse options with you again at any time, and thanks again for talking with me today. I do that for two reasons. Number one, so they have that information. Maybe they were a little upset. I understand they got a little frustrated. The next day, cooler heads prevail, and they want to come back and look at that information again. And then also, I have the information I shared with them documented in writing. So here's that information that I shared. And if they go off and do something and maybe choose later to say, but Carla said, but that's not what I said, I can pull back up that email and say, well, actually, here's the reuse options that I shared with you, and what you went and did doesn't fall within the scope of any of these options. So a lot of my consultations are done face-to-face. Well, I would say the vast majority of my consultations are done via email. So all that's documented via email. When I'm doing consultations face-to-face, I take copious notes. I have those that I can go back and reflect on. What did we talk about? What information did we share? Sometimes even after those face-to-face meetings, whether they were positive or slightly frustrating, I'll still send that email. Here's to recap the issues. Here is to recap the options that we shared. And the same by phone. If I do a consultation over the phone, frequently I'll get their email and say, hey, it was great chatting with you on the phone. Just to recap, here's what we talked about today. Here's reuse options that are available to you. I'm always available for more information. So I think that's how I work diligently to make sure that I am not practicing law and giving good information to people and avoiding giving legal advice. I hope that's helpful, Amanda. Great. Are there any other questions out there? Well, if questions come up later, you will have my contact information. Again, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I am so happy to answer questions where I can. And I will turn this back over to Elois and Rachel to wrap up the session.
Hi, thanks everybody so much for being here today and sticking with us through the technical difficulties today and the last time we tried to do this. But it ended up being a wonderful presentation. I'm glad to those of you who stayed, and thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
All right, I am going to stop the recording, and everybody have a great rest of the day, and this recording link will be sent to all of the registrants on Friday.